The night was thick with the scent of earth and iron, the kind of heavy air that clung to everything, making every breath feel like a struggle. The small town on the edge of the desert never looked this eerie, not with the starlit sky casting long shadows across the dry streets. But tonight, something felt different. Something heavy hung in the air, something that felt alive. I was fixing a set of pipes under the neon hum of my workshop when I first heard her. A soft knock at the door, like the gentle tapping of a bird's beak against glass. Startled, I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out from under the workbench, confused. The door opened, and standing in the threshold was a woman. She was unlike anyone I'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, almost translucent in the dim light, as if dusted with a subtle glow. Her eyes were too bright, too intelligent, to belong to anyone from this world. They held 1,000 secrets, shimmering like distant stars, and her gaze fixed on me like she had been searching for me all along. Her hair, a silver cascade, tumbled in soft waves around her shoulders. There was a coldness to her beauty, a sharpness that made my breath hitch in my throat. "I need your help," she said, her voice cool and steady, like a river flowing through still air. I blinked. "My help?" "Yes. You fix things, don't you? Pipes. Leaks. Machines." Her gaze flitted to the rusted sink pipes I had been working on. She was still in the doorway, though I could feel her presence inside the room, her space encroaching upon mine. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely human, she was something more. "I fix things," I said, my voice suddenly hoarse. I cleared my throat. "But I have a problem," she continued, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "And I need you to fix it." Before I could speak again, she moved past me, her steps soundless on the concrete floor, her eyes scanning the clutter of my workshop. I couldn't help but follow her, a strange pull inside me that I couldn't resist. There was something magnetic about her, like gravity. "What's the problem?" I asked, even though my voice felt smaller now, like it wasn't mine anymore. She stopped by a small, rusted pipe on the far wall, a peculiar connection that had always confused me. "This," she said, pointing at the pipe. I looked at it, then back at her. "That pipe's not supposed to be hooked up like that. It's dangerous. Someone could." "I know," she interrupted, her voice growing sharp. "It's broken. And I need it fixed before the season starts." I frowned. "What season?" She turned her head slowly to look at me, and for the first time, I saw the faintest flicker of emotion in her eyes. Something dark, something that felt forbidden. "It's my mating season," she said, almost in a whisper. "Mating season?" The words sounded like they belonged to some alien planet, not to a woman standing in front of me in my workshop. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. She must have seen the confusion in my eyes because her lips curled into the faintest smile, something between pity and amusement. "You don't understand," she said softly. This is no ordinary problem. And if it's not fixed soon, the consequences could be severe." The way she said it made my stomach twist. There was something hidden behind her words, something she wasn't telling me. But she was here, and I had no reason not to help her, right? I was a mechanic, a fixer. She had a problem. I could solve it. It wasn't that complicated. "I'll fix it," I said, trying to steady my pulse. "But you need to tell me exactly what's going on. This isn't just some leak, is it?" Her gaze softened, but only for a moment. Then, she straightened, turning away from me. She was no longer the mysterious woman in my workshop, but someone else entirely, someone I couldn't quite place. "You won't be able to fix it alone," she said quietly. "I'll need you to follow my lead." I hesitated. Something inside me recoiled at the thought, but I nodded. There was no turning back now. She moved to the back of the workshop, past the old tools and oil-streaked machinery. I followed, my steps slower than hers, unsure what I was getting into. Her every movement seemed deliberate, graceful, like she was in tune with something I couldn't understand. She stopped at the back wall and turned to face me. You'll need to work fast, she said, the tension in her voice sharp. When the full moon rises tomorrow, the timing must be perfect. A chill ran down my spine at her words. A full moon? Tomorrow? Was she talking about the same full moon that had been creeping higher in the night sky since dusk? It was like everything she said was out of place, like a riddle meant to confuse me. But this was real. She was real. And I was already too deep into it to back out. You're not from around here, are you? I finally asked, my voice more of a demand than a question. She paused, her eyes flicking to mine with a strange intensity. For a heartbeat, I thought she might turn and leave, but instead, she stepped closer, until the space between us felt like nothing at all. She was so close I could feel her breath, like a whisper against my skin. No, she said, her voice low and steady. I'm not. But I'm here now. And I need your help. The words hung in the air between us, thick with unspoken meanings. And as much as I wanted to understand, wanted to ask questions and demand answers, I knew the only thing I could do now was follow her lead. The pipes could wait. The glow of the workshop's single light cast long shadows, and the hum of machinery seemed louder than it had ever been. The smell of oil, dust, and metal was suffocating, heavy in the air as I stared at her, the woman whose name I still didn't know, standing there like some ethereal being that didn't quite belong. Her words echoed in my mind. I'm not from here. At the time, I'd taken them as just another cryptic statement in a series of strange, unsettling things she'd said. But as she turned back to the pipe, working with such precision, like she had done this 1,000 times before, my thoughts began to spiral. She wasn't like anyone I had ever met, and not just because of the way she looked. It was the way she moved, like she knew more than I did, like there was a weight in her every step, every word. I watched her, still in disbelief. She was working now, her hands delicate but sure as they twisted the pipes, each turn of her wrist making everything feel like it was happening too fast. I hadn't even thought to ask for her name. What's your name? I finally asked, trying to break the strange silence. She glanced up, eyes flashing with an unreadable expression. There was something about her stare that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. You don't need to know my name. Not yet. Her voice was smooth, melodic, and the way she spoke made it feel like every word had been chosen for a reason. But there was something behind it, a detachment, a secrecy, that unsettled me more than I liked. What's going on here? I pressed. You're not human. Are you? She didn't flinch. Instead, she worked silently, tightening another bolt. Then, after a long pause, she spoke again. Not entirely. I'm not like you. That wasn't the answer I was expecting. But it was the truth, I realized, as I watched her. Every motion was measured, purposeful, like she had learned how to blend in, how to move among humans, but something told me she didn't fully belong here. What do you mean, not like me? Her gaze flickered briefly to mine, her lips curling slightly. Do you think I came here by accident? Do you think I just happened upon your workshop in this desolate town? Her voice was colder now, sharper. I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped myself. I had 100 questions bubbling up, but it seemed like I wasn't supposed to ask all of them. She had something in mind, and I had to follow her lead. I had no choice, after all. The way she spoke, so sure of herself, made me feel like I was just a pawn in whatever game she was playing. Before I could say anything, she turned to face me fully, stepping closer. The scent of lavender mixed with something metallic wafted over me, and for a moment, I lost track of my thoughts. There was a pressure in the air that wasn't from her proximity, but from something else. Something I couldn't put my finger on. You want to help me, don't you? She asked, her voice low. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, but somehow, I didn't mind. I swallowed hard. I don't know what's going on, but, yeah, I do. I just need to understand why you're here. Why this mating season? Her lips parted slightly, but instead of answering, she simply turned her attention back to the pipes. Her expression hardened again. It's not something you need to understand. Not yet. There was a finality in her words, but I wasn't done. Then what's the real problem? I insisted, frustration creeping into my voice. You're asking me to fix a pipe, but everything about you is off. You're not making any sense. She let out a sigh, but there was no annoyance in it, only the weight of something ancient, something knowing. I'm running out of time, she murmured, more to herself than to me. If I don't have this fixed before the moon rises, there will be consequences. You wouldn't understand, and you couldn't fix it on your own. But you can help. She paused as if she was choosing her words carefully. You have to trust me. I felt the pull again, like a thread tugging at my chest, urging me to do something I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she said them, the way her presence seemed to saturate the air around us. She wasn't just any woman. She was something else. Something otherworldly. And despite my better judgment, I was drawn to her. I can fix the pipes, I said, though the words came out more like a promise than a statement. But I don't know what this season is, or why it matters. She nodded slowly, as though she knew I'd come around, even without her explanation. It's a time for transformation. For release. The seasons, they dictate everything. But if the pipes are clogged, if they aren't repaired, it will interrupt the cycle. And there are things you don't want to know, things you're not prepared to face. I thought I understood, but the fear in her eyes told me there was more, something darker, lurking behind her calm facade. She was hiding something, and I wasn't sure if she'd ever tell me. Suddenly, a loud thud interrupted the moment, coming from outside the workshop. She stiffened, her whole body going rigid in an instant, and the room seemed to shrink. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that sound. It was the unmistakable crack of wood hitting concrete. She turned toward the door, eyes wide, alert. We're running out of time, she whispered urgently, the usual coldness in her voice replaced by something else. Something raw. Fix it, now. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew one thing, whatever this woman was hiding, whatever this season truly meant, I was in it now, whether I liked it or not. And the clock was ticking. I didn't hesitate. I turned back to the pipes, hands shaking, but there was no turning back now. Whatever was out there, whatever threat she feared, I had no choice but to face it with her. I just hoped I was ready. I could feel it, something hanging in the air, thick with unspoken tension. Her words still lingered in the corners of my mind, like a haunting whisper. If the pipes aren't fixed, there will be consequences. But consequences for whom? Me? Her? Both of us? My hands trembled as I knelt by the piping, trying to focus on the task at hand. I twisted the wrench, turning it slowly to loosen a stubborn bolt. But with every rotation, my thoughts strayed back to her. Her cryptic warning. The way she moved, so deliberate, so otherworldly. The workshop had fallen silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. That tick, tick, tick that seemed to mock the growing anxiety twisting in my chest. I shot a glance at her, still standing by the door, her back to me. She hadn't moved since that strange noise outside. Her figure was tense, coiled like a spring ready to snap. The moonlight from the high windows painted her in silver, casting her in a glow that made her seem even less human. Her hair, usually soft and cascading down her back, was now pulled into a loose knot, strands escaping in wisps. Her features were sharp in the low light, eyes narrowed, scanning the room. She was alert, and every inch of her body seemed to hum with suppressed energy. I paused, wrench in hand. "What's out there?" I asked, my voice tight. My pulse quickened, an instinctual fear clawing at me. She didn't answer right away, her gaze flickering between the shadows outside and me. Then, her eyes locked with mine, and for a split second, I saw it, the uncertainty. Beneath her calm exterior, she was afraid too. "You don't need to know," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet." My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. "You said something about the moon. The pipes. What does it all mean?" She looked away again, her fingers pressing against her lips as if to hold back more words. "The moon," she murmured, "marks the beginning. The start of the season. But this year's different." The sound of cracking wood outside jolted us both back into focus. The thud came again, louder this time, accompanied by the unmistakable scrape of something dragging along the ground. My skin crawled, and I stood up, wiping my hands on my pants. "What's happening? Who's out there?" She didn't speak for a moment, but her body was vibrating with tension. Finally, she stepped toward me, her voice low but urgent. "You don't understand what's at stake here. If you don't help me..." The door exploded inward with a deafening crash. I barely had time to react before something, or someone, slammed into the workshop, sending dust and debris flying. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the haze of smoke and broken wood, I saw her move faster than any human could, her body fluid, like water, as she stood between me and the unknown threat. A figure appeared through the smoke, tall and hulking, moving with unnatural speed. I couldn't make out its face, but the silhouette alone was enough to send a chill racing down my spine. The air around us seemed to shift, crackling with energy, and I realized with a sudden jolt, she wasn't trying to protect me. She was protecting herself. The creature, whatever it was, lunged forward, its massive limbs reaching for her. But before it could touch her, she twisted out of the way, her movements graceful and precise, like a dancer evading a partner's misstep. "Get out of here," she shouted at me, her voice sharp with command, not fear. "Now." But I couldn't. I didn't know if I could. My feet were glued to the floor, my mind struggling to catch up to the chaos unfolding before me. The figure's growl echoed through the room, a sound that made my insides twist. It was like a beast, but not a normal one. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow hue, burning with malevolent intent. The smell of sulfur filled the air, overpowering everything else. "What is that thing?" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. She didn't answer. Instead, her focus remained solely on the creature, her hands raised in a defensive stance. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice filled with a strange power that seemed to reverberate through the very walls. But the creature wasn't listening. With a sudden movement, it swiped at her, its claws missing her by inches as she ducked and rolled out of the way. My heart pounded, a rush of adrenaline hitting my bloodstream. I didn't know what to do, everything happened so fast. I couldn't let her fight alone. I grabbed the wrench from the workbench and ran toward them. I wasn't sure if it would do any good, but I couldn't just stand there. The creature's glowing eyes snapped to me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition. It was coming for me now. "Get away from him," she yelled, moving faster than I thought possible. She lunged toward the creature with a force that pushed it back, buying me just enough time to dodge its next strike. With a breath, I swung the wrench, aiming for the creature's side. My hit landed, but it barely seemed to faze it. The thing barely flinched, its claws swiping at me with terrifying precision. I backed up, my hands shaking from the effort. But as I stepped back, I saw her. She wasn't just avoiding the creature. She was attacking it. No, she was drawing something out of it, some kind of energy, swirling with a dark light that wasn't supposed to exist in this world. Her hands glowed as she manipulated the energy, pulling it like thread, weaving it into something that I couldn't comprehend. "Help me," she shouted again, her voice cracking from the strain. I didn't hesitate this time. I stepped forward, my heart racing, and placed my hand on hers. The power surged through me, a connection I couldn't explain. The air crackled, and suddenly, the creature screamed. It was retreating, backing into the shadows from which it came. As the door slammed shut, I stood there, breathless. Covered in sweat, my heart still pounding. And I looked at her, this woman who had brought me into something I couldn't begin to understand. But there was no turning back now. The silence in the workshop was deafening. My breath still came in shallow bursts, and the air was thick with the remnants of something I couldn't comprehend. The creature, whatever it was gone, but its presence still lingered in the corners of my mind, a shadow that refused to dissipate. I glanced at her. She stood across the room, her body rigid, eyes locked on the door as though she expected the creature to return at any moment. Her chest rose and fell in rhythm with her shallow breaths, but there was something different about her now. She was different. Before, she had been tense, controlled, but now, there was an unease I hadn't seen in her before. Her eyes flickered to me as I took a step toward her, unsure of what I was supposed to say. What could I possibly say? The woman who had just saved my life, who had just pulled off something that defied every rule of logic, was now standing in front of me, vulnerable. "Are you okay?" My voice sounded too weak, too small. She nodded, but her gaze never left the door. "We're not safe yet." The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down, I knew she was right. The creature was still out there, and whatever dark force had brought it here was far from finished. "We have to move," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "The moon's at its peak. This is when they come. We can't stay here." "Who are they?" My words were rough, etched with the frustration I didn't know how to voice. "What are they?" She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and there was something in her eyes, something that told me she wasn't just hiding something from me. She was protecting me from the truth. "They're not from this world," she said quietly, her voice shaking with the weight of the admission. "They came long before you or I. And they've been watching us for longer than you can imagine." I opened my mouth to ask more, but the words stuck in my throat. It was too much to process. Too much to believe. And yet, here we were, standing in the aftermath of an encounter with a creature that shouldn't exist, a power I couldn't fathom. She stepped toward me, her movements deliberate but slow, as if trying to keep some semblance of control. Her eyes flickered to the workbench, and I followed her gaze. My wrench, still clutched in my hand, was a small, insignificant tool in the face of everything I'd just witnessed. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice breaking. "None of this was supposed to happen." I shook my head, trying to focus on the one thing that felt within reach, her. "Then why didn't you tell me? You've been hiding something from me. You could have told me the truth." She closed her eyes, pain flashing across her face. "I couldn't. It's too dangerous. You wouldn't have believed me." "But I believe you now," I said, taking a step closer. My heart was pounding, but not with fear anymore. No, this was something different. Something stronger. What happened tonight, that was real. I saw it. I felt it. I don't need to hear it in words. I just need to understand why you're here. Why me? Her gaze softened, but the wariness in her eyes never fully left. "You don't have a choice. Not anymore." Before I could ask what she meant, there was a sound, a noise from the hallway that snapped both of us out of our conversation. My heart rate spiked again, and I instinctively reached for the wrench, even though I knew it wouldn't help against whatever came next. "Shit," she muttered, eyes narrowing. She glanced toward the door, her expression hardening. "They found us." The room seemed to tilt as I followed her eyes. There, in the darkened hallway just outside the workshop, a shadow moved. And it wasn't just any shadow. This one was too solid. Too real. I felt the air grow thick again, oppressive, as if something heavy was pressing against my chest. The temperature seemed to drop, and I shivered despite myself. "Get back," she ordered, her voice low and commanding. I didn't question her. Instead, I stepped back, heart hammering as I put space between us and the door. Her eyes never left the hallway. She was ready. I could feel it, her body vibrating with the readiness of someone who had faced this kind of danger before. But I hadn't. And that terrified me more than anything. The shadow moved again, closer this time. There was no mistaking it now. It was a figure, tall and thin, with an unnatural grace that sent a jolt of recognition through me. It was the same creature. The one from earlier. But this time, it wasn't alone. As the figure stepped fully into the doorway, another one appeared beside it. Then another. There were more of them. Silent, massive, and creeping toward us with a predatory slowness that made my skin crawl. "We can't stay here," she said again, more urgently this time. "They'll tear this place apart." I looked at her, torn. "What do we do?" Her lips tightened into a thin line. "We fight." My blood froze. "How?" "You said they weren't human." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shifted slightly, pulling a long, dark object from the folds of her coat. It gleamed in the dim light, a weapon, but not any weapon I'd ever seen before. It was sleek, almost too clean, as if it had been forged from a material that didn't belong in this world. "They're not invincible," she said quietly. "But we need to be quick." The first creature stepped forward, its yellow eyes glowing in the dark. And in that moment, everything changed. I didn't have a choice anymore. This wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about fighting for something greater. Something we couldn't yet understand. "Get ready," she said, her voice now a fierce whisper. I raised the wrench in my hands, my fingers tightening around the cold steel. But now, it wasn't just fear coursing through me. There was something else, something new, that stirred deep inside. And for the first time, I understood what she meant. There was no going back.